Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Vidal, aren't you afraid to be alone in the room? Asked the mother of the 3-year-old son. No, Boogeyman is protecting me, said the boy firmly. Who? Boogeyman? Are you sure? The surprised mother asked. Yeah, confirmed the boy. And where is he? Over there, in the wardrobe. And the boy pointed decisively at the old wardrobe. The antique, bulky, ornate wardrobe had been in Vidal's room for a long time, practically since his birth. When the boy was born, his parents were renovating the house and planning to get rid of this giant piece of furniture, but Vidal's grandmother, his mother's mother, opposed it, and she had her reasons. Firstly, it was her house and her wardrobe. And secondly, well, I swear, it's still quite sturdy, the grandmother said. Yes, it's not new, but it's real wood. It will outlive all of us, mark my words. Even Vidal's grandchildren will store their clothes in it. God forbid, Vidal's father whispered quietly. What did you say, son-in-law? I can't hear you, Senora Pastora remarked sarcastically. Oh, Senora Lucha, you hear everything. Vidal's father remarked. It's not sturdy, it's just heavy. Probably rotted a long time ago. How dare you, Hugo? It survived the revolution. It's. The elderly woman couldn't find words to defend her beloved piece of furniture. Well, tell us, Senora Lucha. What is it like? A coffin, right? Hugo intentionally provoked his mother-in-law. Yes, like a coffin, Hugo. This wardrobe is even sturdier than me, the elderly woman retorted. Yeah, we'll bury you in it someday. How could you, young man? The grandmother was outraged. Just like that, Senora Lucha. I think it's time for you to go somewhere. Go where? The old woman didn't understand the sarcasm. To the cemetery, Senora Lucha. You've lingered here long enough, Hugo openly mocked. I would ask you to be more respectful, young man. And by the way, how many times do I have to tell you? Don't call me so informally. Who am I to you, Lucha? If you, with the remnants of politeness, address me by my first name, then bother to use its full form. I'm not just any Lucha. I am Luz Pastora. So, someone should get ready for school along with me to going to the cemetery, by the way, Senora Pastora proudly declared. She was from the rural intellectuals, taught at the local village school for many years. Recently, she retired just when her daughter received the pleasant news that she was expecting a child. Senora Pastora gave up her beloved job to take care of her grandson. She had no idea that the new phase of her life would begin with such gloomy events as renovations and getting rid of her favorite belongings. In reality, Senora Pastora didn't live in the same house as her daughter, son-in-law, and grandson. The house officially belonged to her, but she had been living near the school in a comfortable apartment attached to it for a long time. The school principal offered it to Senora Pastora when her daughter got married and the old teacher was looking for a rental place for the newlyweds. She firmly believed that young people should live separately and the elderly should not get in their way. For the young family, the apartment near the school was definitely a bit small, so Luz decided to move and leave the house to the young couple. She couldn't have imagined that in just 3 years, her new son-in-law would be in charge of her furniture in her own home and would insult her openly. Yet, when he was in school, he used to be such a decent boy. She was so happy that her daughter married Hugo. And now this decent boy seemed to hate her with all his heart and was planning to bury her, even in the wardrobe. Mom, you misunderstood everything. Hugo didn't mean that at all. He just made a poor joke. Come on, Mom, he's tired, he worked all day, and then he had to assemble this stupid furniture they didn't send instructions for. And then you showed up. Honestly, this wardrobe has been quite a hassle. As long as I've lived, I remember it, the daughter intervened in the argument. In reality, she was right. Hugo didn't hate Senora Pastora at all. He still respected her as a teacher and as his wife's mother. But there was something that Senora Pastora's daughter didn't know yet, and Hugo couldn't bring himself to tell her, not to upset her in the late stages of pregnancy. So, Hugo vented his frustration on whoever was around. I remember him just as long as I remember you. So, should we send both of you to the dump or the cemetery? By the way, I can still get married, Senora Pastora proudly declared. Oh God, please, no, Hugo muttered. Mom, please tell me you're joking, the daughter stared at her. And what if I'm not? It's not only young people who should have their own living spaces. And why do you think I should be alone? Senora Pastora triumphantly stated. This is what I was afraid of, Hugo muttered under his breath. This was the secret that he hadn't planned to reveal to his wife just yet. Just a couple of weeks ago, his wife had sent Hugo to deliver some trinket to her mother. Hugo arrived unannounced and literally caught the old folks in the act of kissing. And it wouldn't be a big deal, but Senora Pastora had chosen Senor Silvas, the former school PE teacher and handyman all in one, as her fiancé, and by the way, Hugo's grandfather. Yes, such coincidences happen. But in a small village and one school, it's not a coincidence anymore, it's a pattern. Everyone is related to each other. Hugo himself didn't really mind, but Senora Pastora's daughter had a different opinion. Where did she get the idea that a woman in her old age should sit on a bench and knit socks, taking care of her grandchildren? Well, the questions were only for Senora Pastora. Who put such thoughts into her daughter's head? No one but herself. Lucha raised her daughter alone. Hugo, on the other hand, grew up with his grandpa Senor Silvas. It just so happened that Hugo's parents passed away early. He never told anyone what, how, and why it happened. A tragedy occurred. He just lived with his grandfather, who worked at the school. What do you mean, get married, Mom? The daughter protested. Mom, it's happening. And so it happened, what Hugo had feared. Such news triggered the labor, but thankfully, they weren't premature. While his wife was in the maternity ward, Hugo, at her request, moved the wardrobe into the nursery. While Vidal was still little, he didn't care what was in his room. Mom, please don't fight. And you, Hugo? Well, you've got yourself into this with the wardrobe. Move it to Vidal's room, quick, said Lucha's daughter, battling contractions. That's how the old wardrobe settled in Vidal's room. Now it would be the third generation in the family to remember this wardrobe from birth. Time passed, life went on. Hugo stopped worrying about the old wardrobe. It just stood there and didn't bother anyone. The story of the romantic relationship between Senora Pastora and Senor Silvas had a logical continuation when Vidal's mother was discharged from the maternity ward. She categorically didn't want to hear anything about her mother remarrying, especially to her husband's grandfather. You, Mom, how can you? He's older than you, she said, wrinkling her nose. As if I'm some fresh rose myself, Senora Pastora replied. Your Hugo is older than you too. That's different, Mom. So what do you want from me? Luz couldn't understand. I want you to take care of your grandchild instead of being so silly. You know, there's a saying, there is no fool like an old fool. But Luz wasn't about to give up. She and Senor Silvas continued to meet in secret. In a way, it was even fun. They felt young again, like teenagers sneaking out on dates behind their parents' backs. But now, they were sneaking around behind their children and grandchild, and for Senor Silvas, even his great-grandchild. And however it may be, the old folks began to consider the possibility of formalizing their relationship with an official marriage. But what if my daughter is against it, Sandro? Luz worried. Of course, she will be, Lucha. Well, excuse me, but I just can't remember how such a well-bred and intelligent woman couldn't raise her own daughter properly, Senor Silvas asked. Perhaps he was the only person from whose lips nickname Lucha seemed sweet and pleasant to her ears. She allowed only him to call her that. For everyone else, she was Luz. Oh, Sandro, I wonder myself. Maybe because all my life I was busy raising other people's children, Luz sadly replied. And now it has come to this, I'm afraid of my own daughter. Don't be afraid. Where will she go when we're already married? She won't make us get a divorce. There are no such rules and laws. Thank goodness, we don't need their permission, Sandro chuckled. No one knew about the old folks' intention to get married. They tearfully begged the local council not to disclose their secret when they submitted their marriage application. And then, just 2 days before the wedding, the groom suddenly disappeared. Strange, Vidal's mom thought when she closed her son's bedroom door. Usually, at 3 years old, a child's imagination starts to develop, and children begin to fear the dark. They imagine various monsters in the darkness, which transform from cartoons and books, from heard fairy tales, or even from poorly made toys that could scare or surprise a child. But Vidal is like a superhero. He sleeps without light with the door open. A boogeyman is guarding me, Vidal would say, smiling sweetly. Who is this boogeyman? Mom would ask. Will you introduce us? No. He doesn't want to get acquainted. He can't speak and lives in the wardrobe, the boy would reply with a smile. Mom looked at the old wardrobe with suspicion. She thought about opening it and taking a look inside, but had any parent ever believed that there was a monster under their child's bed? For some reason, everyone believed that children made up all sorts of nonsense just to avoid going to sleep. Vidal's mom didn't think so, but something stopped her from peeking inside the wardrobe. Well, if he's guarding you, then he must be good and won't harm you, his mom said and kissed him on the forehead, tucking him in. Good night, sweetie. Good night, Mommy, Vidal said. But still, it's strange, a boogeyman, Mom thought. Usually, children are afraid of boogeymen, but this one has appointed himself as a protector. I wish I could see this boogeyman. About an hour had passed since Vidal went to sleep, and his mom decided to check just in case. She tiptoed to her son's room and suddenly flung the door open. Turning on the light wasn't necessary. The moonlight streaming through the window bathed the room in its magical silvery glow, and everything was clearly visible. There was the little chair, the scattered toys, and there was Vidal, peacefully asleep in his crib. And it seemed that the boogeyman was there too. Mom smiled. On the front of the wardrobe was a strange, comical drawing of a man. She remembered how, as a child, she had wanted to become an artist but didn't have an easel or paintbrushes. So, without much thought, she had taped a sheet of notebook paper to the wardrobe's wall and started drawing with markers. She drew a portrait of her favorite movie character at the time, D'Artagnan, with a hat and a feather, and so on. She thought her drawing was quite impressive. Little did she know that the markers would soak into the paper and leave an imprint on the wardrobe's wall. The drawing hung there for about a week, and when they were tidying up for another holiday, her mom had removed this masterpiece and saw what had happened to the old furniture. In short, she got scolded, and they made the girl scrub off the marker stains. She spent the whole day on it. She didn't know what those markers were made of, but in the daylight, you couldn't see anything. But the magical moonlight interacted with the remaining paint, and the portrait of the musketeer appeared on the wardrobe wall. Now, as an adult, Mom understood that this musketeer didn't look like D'Artagnan. It resembled more like a crooked squash with arms and legs, covered with its own leaf instead of a hat. Perhaps Vidal woke up a couple of times during the night and saw this portrait in the moonlight. Thankfully, the child endowed this masterpiece with good qualities. Mom walked up to the window and pulled the curtain to prevent the boogeyman from disturbing Vidal's sleep. But why a boogeyman? Where did he get that from? Oh yes, it was Grandma with her folk stories. It felt like she worked not as an English language and literature teacher, but as a folk art methodologist. How many times had she told her not to fill her child's head with epic heroes? He's only 3 years old. Then Mom remembered that, while admiring her childhood masterpiece in her son's room, she had left her phone on the windowsill. She had to go get it. The alarm clock would go off soon and wake up little Vidal. The woman went into the room, opened the door, and stopped for a moment. Weird. She distinctly remembered pulling the curtain to keep the moonlight from disturbing her son, but the room was flooded with moonlight again, and the curtain was drawn back. It seems Vidal started walking at night, she told her husband over breakfast. Why do you think so? Hugo inquired. I think he's still afraid to sleep in the dark, so he pulls back the curtain to let the moon act as a nightlight while he falls asleep. Yesterday I closed the curtain, but then when I went back for my phone, I found it open again. It's possible, Hugo replied thoughtfully. It was a hot summer, and Mom left all the windows in the house open. Let the summer heat ventilate the air. But suddenly, during the night, a cool breeze came in. Mom closed the window in her room and decided to do the same in Vidal's room. After closing the window, she went downstairs but didn't make it to the bed before hearing a sound coming from her son's room. Strange. What could it be? The woman returned and was astounded by what she saw. She distinctly remembered that she had just closed the window in her son's room, but there it was wide open again. A draft? It couldn't be. She turned the handle. Vidal was peacefully sleeping in his crib. Mom reached under the blanket and touched her son's leg. His leg and the other one were warm. No, he hadn't gotten out of bed. So, who or what had opened the window again? The woman picked up her sleepy child and carried him into her bedroom, away from any bogeyman or protectors. Mom, how did I end up in your and Dad's bed? Did I sleepwalk again? Why don't I remember it? Vidal asked the next morning. No, you didn't walk there by yourself. A kind fairy carried you in her arms and brought you to us on her wings. That's why you didn't notice anything. But there are no fairies, Vidal responded, strangely offended. Well, if there are no fairies, are there bogeymen? Is that what you heard from Grandma? Mom was also a bit offended by Vidal's comment. What are you two talking about? Dad asked. I feel like I'm missing something. So, Mom told him about what had happened with the window during the night and a few nights earlier with the curtain. I think you're exaggerating. The house is old, something might be off kilter. You turned the handle, but it didn't catch properly, and that's it. I'll take a look after work at what's going on with the window, he said, then, smiling at his son, he leaned his head toward him and ruffled his hair. Send my regards to the boogeyman or whoever lives in your wardrobe. Mom, can I treat the boogeyman to some candy? Vidal asked. Well, that's going too far. That's enough of these unknown heroes for me. Mom got upset and, without finishing her breakfast, went into her son's room. The window was wide open again, even though she distinctly remembered closing it before selecting clothes for her son. All right, who's hiding in the wardrobe? The boogeyman or schmoogeyman, come out. She shouted. The woman opened the wardrobe's door sharply. All the clothes were neatly folded on the shelf, just as they had been a few minutes ago. In the large clothing compartment, they stored their winter and autumn clothes, and at the bottom were boxes of shoes. The wardrobe was large and very spacious. Mom ran her hand over the clothes in different directions. Well, I'll say it again, who's in there? Of course, no one responded to the woman, only the hangers rattled, which were empty. Something glistened below. She leaned down, and it turned out to be candy wrappers, one after another. There were about 10 of them. Crumpled, they were scattered between boxes of winter shoes. Vidal, you little thief, thought the mom. Not only does he sleepwalk, but he's also sneaking candy from the pantry. And she wondered where all those candies had gone. She had bought a whole kilogram. And now the little rascal had found them. He would probably blame it all on the boogeyman. And who could blame him? Well, what's the use of guessing? She herself only knew half of her family. As for her father and what kind of family they were, the woman had no clue. Her mother consistently refused to discuss this topic and never told her anything about her father, who he was, where he came from. Why do you need to know? It's enough that he was a scoundrel and abandoned you even before you were born, Sonora Pastora replied. When she was a little girl, her mother's words made her feel uncomfortable, guilty, as if her father had abandoned them because of her. Perhaps subconsciously, she now seeks revenge on her mother for blaming her father's departure and disapproving of her personal life. She just wants her mother to feel what it's like to spend her whole life feeling guilty. It wasn't until the woman grew up and was preparing to get married that she suddenly realized that she bore no blame and that her father really might just be a scoundrel. Or maybe, if there was any blame to be placed, it rested more on her mother, on Senora Pastora, who willingly dedicated herself to other people's children rather than her own. "It's my calling," Luz would say when her daughter reproached her with this. Once, they had a conversation about her father again. Before getting married, the woman decided to find out if there were any hereditary or genetic illnesses on his side. After all, she was planning not just to get married, she wanted a family and planned to have children, maybe more than one. What surprises could be waiting for her when half of the variables in their equation were still unknown? "There are no illnesses there, except for impudence and meanness," her mother replied. "And the fact that he abandoned you." "No, Mom, don't sing your favorite song again. If Dad abandoned anyone, it's not me, but first and foremost, you. And I'm not even sure he knows I exist in this world." Her mother sat there with her mouth wide open. "Look at daughter, she's just like her father," Luz finally managed to say. What did her memories of those conversations with her mother have to do with discovering candy wrappers in the wardrobe? "Mom, she hasn't called in a while." Her daughter didn't know about the upcoming wedding, but she did know about Hugo's grandfather, who had disappeared last week. Everyone in the village knew. They searched for the old man in the forest and by the river. "Looks like he found himself someone younger in the neighboring village," someone in the village venomously remarked. Luz and Sandro kept their relationship secret from Luz's daughter, but you couldn't hide from the villagers. They noticed everything and found out everything, even things that had never happened. "What are they talking about, Mom?" the daughter asked Luz back then. "I don't know, how should I decipher them? They should mind their own business," Senora Pastora replied. "Then why did you blush like that? I seem to remember something. When Vidal was born, you threatened to get married. Is that what I'm thinking of?" "I have no idea what you're thinking about. Everyone thinks according to their own depravity." Someone or something distracted Vidal's mom back then, and they didn't talk to her mother anymore and didn't really see each other either. "Maybe I should call," the woman thought, and immediately heard her husband's anxious voice. "Hurry, they're calling and saying that your mom is bad. They're taking her to the hospital. They say Senora Lucha is dying." Hugo still had the phone to his ear. "So start the car, let's go to the hospital in the city." "And Vidal?" "By the time he finishes his porridge, gets dressed," Hugo said in bewilderment. "Well, then, Vidal will stay home alone, he's not a little kid. At his age, I used to sit at home for half a day when my mother was at school, and sometimes even the whole day when her precious students were getting ready for exams." "Oh my, I didn't expect you to be so grudge-bearing," Hugo said. He took the car keys and shouted to his son, "Your mother and I are leaving for a short while on business. Stay alone and don't open the door to anyone. And don't get into any trouble with your boogeyman, and make sure you don't eat all the candy." "Why are you encouraging this? Imaginary friends are not so harmless, especially in childhood. There's even a term for it in psychiatry. None of us knows who our relatives were and how it might have affected our genetics." "Oh, it seems you've been rereading your mother's books." "I'm not encouraging anything. I just played along a bit so the boy wouldn't be afraid to stay home alone. And by the way, unlike you, I know who my relatives were." "Really? And who? Care to tell me?" "I don't remember anyone other than your PE teacher grandfather. But I do remember how he made us run 10 laps around the school during PE if we were late," his wife replied, taking a jab. They stopped arguing because they had arrived at the hospital. "What do you mean there's none and hasn't even arrived?" Senora Pastora's daughter wondered. "Did we somehow pass the ambulance?" I would have noticed if I had overtaken them on the road, Hugo protested as well. They sat in the hospital lobby and waited for half an hour, but no ambulances arrived, and nothing was happening at all. Maybe there's some mistake? Call your mother. One great quality they both shared was that, no matter how much they argued and teased each other, in moments of crisis and trouble, they came together and acted not just together, but as if they were one organism. They understood each other with half a word and forgot all the disputes and quarrels. I'm already calling. She's not picking up. Let's go to her. Luz, as usual, was sitting in her favorite chair and reading. After Senor Silva's disappearance, she tried to distract herself with books, but it was not very effective. Her thoughts were scattered, she couldn't concentrate, and her mind kept drifting back to Sandro. What a scoundrel! Oh, what a scoundrel! And how polite and attentive he was. And, most importantly, he insisted on the wedding, and there you are. Probably, our grandchild will be just like him. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, Luz thought. Oh, my silly daughter will cry her eyes out because of this Hugo. Mom, are you okay? What happened? Where's the ambulance? Luz's daughter rushed into the teacher's house near the school. Senora Lucha, are you okay? Hugo followed after his wife. What's wrong with you? I'm fine, relatively speaking, of course. What ambulance? You both seem out of sorts. We got a call, Hugo said, bewildered, and showed everyone his phone for some reason. Who called? Luz couldn't make heads or tails of anything. Vidal. Luz's daughter could finally catch her breath. Within a second, she jumped up and, like a hurricane, ran out into the street and sprinted through the village to their house. No one named Vidal called me. Are you talking about our little Vidal? Luz was still puzzled. Where are you going? We have a car. Hugo shouted after his wife, but she was already out of sight. It's important to understand that they didn't live very far from each other. And while Hugo retrieved the keys and started the car, his wife was already at home. There, she was met with a scene not for the faint-hearted, for sturdy thugs lay tied up on the floor. 3 men and, it seemed, 1 woman. They were all securely bound, and each had a gag in their mouth. Sitting beside them was a cheerful Vidal. The boy was laughing and clapping his hands. It seemed like he had defeated 4 robbers who had broken into their home. However, Vidal was only 3 years old, and he didn't possess any special physical abilities, and it was unlikely that he had any superpowers. After all, they don't live in a comic book world. Vidal, are you okay? Did they hurt you? His mom asked, worried. No, Mommy, I'm fine. We defeated them, the boy replied. We? Who are we? Who tied up these men and, it seems, a lady? Me and the Boogeyman. He did everything himself. Cool. Like Superman. He went whoosh whoosh whoosh, and they all fell down. I just brought some rope from the pantry, Vidal explained in his childlike manner. Vidal, please, stop making things up. It's not good. There's no such thing as a boogeyman. It's just a drawing on the wardrobe. Who did this? His mom was already shouting at Vidal. I don't know anything about a drawing, the boogeyman helped. He lives in the wardrobe, Vidal cried from hurt. The woman rushed to the antique wardrobe with the intention of smashing it to pieces, so there would be no memory left of any bogeyman. Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? Hugo's voice came from behind. His wife turned around in surprise. In the doorway of the children's room stood her husband. He looked stunned and lost. With huge eyes, as they say, the size of 5 kopecks, he stared at the tied-up criminals. You mean Mom and Dad? Hugo's wife was surprised. You said they were dead. As you can see, they're alive and kicking. But you said they were dead. I've known you since I was 12, and all this time you lived without parents, and now you're saying that these are them. And what are they doing in our house? In my house, in my mother's house. You lied? You lied to me? His wife yelled, attacking Hugo. He hugged her by the shoulders, preventing her from waving her fists. Calm down, and by the way, don't forget that you were 12 at the time, and I was already 16 when I used to come to your mother for extra lessons. I didn't lie. I genuinely believed they were no longer alive. That's what Grandpa told me. And if Grandpa were here, he would have confirmed it. Besides, how would I know what they were doing in our house? Maybe they wanted to see their grandchild? And did they bring these two as godparents? Hugo's wife pointed to the other two criminals. It's terrifying to imagine what would have happened if we were at home. One of Hugo's parents mumbled through the gag. His wife calmed down after a while. What really helped was the expression on Hugo's face when he met his bound relatives. Vidal, my boy, can you tell us how you tied up these gentlemen and the lady? Hugo now turned to his son. It was the Boogeyman, Daddy, I swear. Well, all right, let it be the Boogeyman. Now your mom and I will call the police. They'll come and take away both the bandits and your Boogeyman. We shouldn't tell them about the Boogeyman, right? You don't want them to take him away? No, the boy replied. Then let's think about what we'll tell the police without mentioning the Boogeyman, Hugo hinted to his son. But I don't know, Daddy. It's really the Boogeyman. But I don't want them to take him away. Let's say it was you. No, that won't work. All right, let's stick with the Boogeyman. We'll call the police, and they can figure it out for themselves. Surprisingly, the law enforcement officers arrived quite quickly once they learned that the call came from their former teacher. The students loved Sonora Pastora, or maybe it was just a slow day with no crimes in the district, and they were bored on duty. They removed the ropes from the criminals, handcuffed them, and removed the gags. The two who were Hugo's parents indeed confirmed their identity. However, they didn't know that their son believed they were dead. Hugo's father, the son of Senor Silvas, had literally kidnapped his wife from her home, indulged in lawlessness, drinking, and partying. They engaged in not only robbery but also theft. As it turned out, from the very beginning, they were the so-called sweet couple of the local criminal world, a kind of Bonnie and Clyde. They had repeatedly escaped from prison and resumed their criminal activities. That's when Hugo's grandfather took him away when he was almost 10, and they moved to this village. His grandfather was athletic, had spent his whole life in sports, and was easily hired as a PE teacher at the local school, and also as a housekeeping educator. Hugo's parents no longer bothered them, and perhaps they didn't even know where they were. So, Senor Silvas decided to take advantage of the situation and simply told the boy that his parents had died. He probably didn't want him to know who his parents were and what they did. The old man managed to raise his grandson into an upright person, although his wife, Hugo's mother-in-law, never thought so. He hadn't seen his parents for 20 years, and yet he was able to recognize them. It was truly a miracle. As it turned out, the phone call about Sonora Lucha's illness was made by the criminals to divert the family from home. They couldn't have imagined that Hugo and his wife would leave their little boy at home, and they certainly didn't know they were breaking into their son's house, not to mention that they had a grandson. As they say, coincidences are not accidental. When the police arrived at the house, it seemed that Vidal was genuinely scared, even more so than when the robbers had broken in. He didn't respond to any questions, except by shaking his head. No one was able to get any coherent information from the boy about who had tied up the criminals so professionally. In that case, we'll have to take you to jail as well, one of the policemen said. Since you're not talking, it means you're helping the criminals, and that makes you a criminal too. Officer, senor, my friend did it, he's a good guy. Promise you won't take him to jail, the boy suddenly said. Why would we take him if he's a good guy? We don't take good people anywhere, especially if they're your friends, reassured the policeman. It's the Boogeyman, the boy said innocently. Oh my God, how much longer? Vidal's mother sighed wearily. The police officers exchanged glances with a smile. Everyone says the Boogeyman is bad, but I know he's good, the boy continued. And where is your boogeyman friend? Where does he live? The policeman asked again. He lives in this closet, proudly said Vidal. Really? How did he end up there? Didn't the boogeyman tell you anything? The policeman inquired. I hid him there. Brought him home and hid him. He only comes out at night, eats candies, and goes out the window to play, and then comes back. Will you allow us to take a look in your closet? The policeman asked with deliberate politeness. Yeah, Vidal nodded. All the adults rushed to the closet. The policeman opened the clothing compartment and pushed aside the hangers. Everyone, especially Hugo, was astonished by what they saw. In the closet, among boxes of winter shoes, sat Hugo's grandfather. Seeing a crowd of unfamiliar and familiar people, not to mention the policeman, the old man got scared, covered his face with his hands, and began to mutter something incoherent. It was clear that he was not in his right mind. But what had happened to him all of a sudden? First, they needed to provide medical assistance to the old man, and then they could question him. They called an ambulance, and since Hugo knew about his mother-in-law's romantic attachment to her fiancé, he called Senora Pastora and told her that they had found her groom but that something had happened to him. How did the old man manage to tie up 4 criminals? The policeman marveled. It was quite simple. Grandpa had worked as a physical education teacher in the school almost his whole life. It was a piece of cake for him. Thanks to the doctors and Senora Pastora's constant caring, Senor Silvas quickly recovered. His speech and, most importantly, his memory swiftly returned. As it turned out, instead of the traditional bachelor party on the eve of their wedding with Luz, Senor Silvas decided to take a stroll in the woods. He really wanted to gather mushrooms and prepare a festive dinner for his beloved woman on their wedding day. He no longer had friends, he had retired a long time ago. They didn't make any official announcements or invite anyone to their wedding, but they still referred to it as a wedding between themselves. No restaurants were booked, and there were no restaurants in the village. However, Senor Silvas was planning to spend a quiet evening at home and have a delicious dinner. He intended to visit his children, Hugo and his wife, in the morning and tell them that they were now a real family. But his plans were not meant to be. It started drizzling, a thunderstorm was brewing, the grass was wet, and someone had left an exposed wire from an old pole out in the open due to negligence. Although that pole had long been disconnected from the power lines, a lightning bolt that struck it, standing alone in the field, had its own agenda. Senor Silvas was just crossing this field to the neighboring forest. He stepped on a bare wire. When he woke up, he didn't remember who he was or where he was. 2 days he wandered the surroundings, possibly by memory, or maybe by chance, he stumbled upon his own garden. There, in the backyard, Vidal found him. The old man was in such a state that the boy didn't recognize his great-grandfather. To his shame, Senor Silvas was so engrossed in romantic affairs with Luz that he rarely visited his great-grandson's home. How the boy decided to put the old man in the wardrobe and why he called him Boogeyman, history remains silent. It was the decision of a child's imagination. Vidal decided that the boogeyman from his grandmother's fairy tales should look exactly like that. And the true miracle was how the old man managed to survive a week on candies. As for Hugo's parents and their associates, they were imprisoned again. What attracted them to this quiet and modest house, you might ask? Well, we'll answer you, it was that very wardrobe. Now Vidal's grandmother, Senora Pastora, herself decided to sell this wardrobe. It simply didn't fit in her small apartment, and she really wanted to give it to Sandro as a wedding gift. She photographed the wardrobe and posted an advertisement for sale. That's where the criminals saw it. It was like 2 drops of water similar to an old wardrobe from a family of a certain noble lineage. Once upon a time, this family became poor, and after the revolution, they were scattered around the world, who knows where. But a persistent legend circulated that a lord, when the enemies approached their garden, hid the family jewels in one of the hiding places of the old wardrobe. Which lord exactly he didn't say. He was caught and executed. There was a lot of old furniture in the estate, some was sold, some was looted. Most of the furniture burned when there were riots in the estate, but a few items survived. Neither Luz nor her daughter had any idea of how this wardrobe ended up in their family. It had always been with them, it seemed, long before the revolution. None of them considered themselves descendants of a noble family, and certainly no one hid their origins. And their surnames, as it turned out, were different. No one responded to Luz's ads. Soon she forgot that she had put the wardrobe up for sale. Who needs such a huge thing in a modern, small apartment? She decided to make a different wedding gift for her future husband. That's when Hugo's parents saw this wardrobe in the advertisement. They collected urban and rural legends and were engaged in treasure hunting. That's what led them to their son's house, not the desire to meet their grandson. Well, for the sake of fun, let's look for a hiding place, Hugo said, smiling and holding an axe in his hands. At a family council, it was decided to disassemble this wardrobe and take it to the barn or throw it away. What's the use of it? It occupied Vidal's entire half of the room. The boy was growing, he needed more space. Nobody, except the criminals, was interested in this wardrobe. One blow to the back wall of the wardrobe was enough for Rusty Nails to fly off with it. And before the eyes of the stunned relatives, there was a hiding place, and in it family jewels. So that's why it was so heavy, Hugo said, who had moved it into Vidal's room alone when his wife was in the maternity hospital. Soon the family built a new house. Thank you for listening to the end. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and also click on the bell icon so you won't miss new videos. All the best to you.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.